One week after Pearl Harbor, an American submarine found a Japanese freighter in the Philippines. The crew fired 8 torpedoes, 7 missed. The 8th hit the hull directly. It did not explode. The freighter sailed away undamaged. The Navy knew their torpedoes had problems before the war began. They sent men into combat with them anyway. When those men came back reporting that the weapons did not work, the Navy blamed the crews. This is the story of the worst weapons scandal in American military history. The Mark 14 torpedo was the most advanced anti-ship weapon in the United States Navy when the war began. It was 21 feet long, and it was powered by a steam turbine capable of driving it at 46 knots through the water. Its secret weapon was the Mark 6 exploder, a device so classified that the maintenance manual written for it was never distributed to the crews who would use it in combat. The exploder had 2 ways to destroy a ship. First, a contact pistol detonated when the torpedo struck the hull directly. Second, a magnetic influence exploder sensed the steel hull of a ship passing overhead and detonated beneath the keel, where no armor protected the most vulnerable point. Breaking a ship's keel from below was far more lethal than punching a hole in its side. The Navy believed it had built the perfect weapon. The Mark 6 magnetic exploder had been tested exactly twice before the war. Both tests were conducted in 1926. One torpedo ran under the target without exploding at all. The second test sank the target. 2 tests in 12 years. That was the entire experimental record of the most critical component of America's primary submarine weapon. The reason testing was so limited was money. The Great Depression had cut naval budgets to almost nothing throughout the 1930s. Each Mark 14 cost $10,000, roughly 5 times the price of a new car. Fully testing the weapon with live warheads against real targets would have destroyed both. So the Navy cut corners. Tests were conducted with lightweight dummy warheads filled with water so the torpedo could be recovered after each run. The dummy warhead weighed significantly less than a live one. The depth mechanism, calibrated for a practice torpedo, would cause a fully armed combat version to run 11 feet deeper than its set depth. On a ship whose keel might sit only 10 feet below the surface, a torpedo set to run at 10 feet would pass harmlessly underneath at 21. The magnetic exploder had only been tested in American waters off the coast of Rhode Island. It had never been verified to function correctly in the Pacific, where the Earth's magnetic field behaves differently enough to cause the exploder to trigger prematurely, or not at all. The weapon sent to war in December 1941 had 3 separate defects built into it before a single shot was fired in anger. Any one of them alone was enough to make it useless. Together, they created something that submarine crews later described in a single sentence. The only reliable feature of the torpedo was its unreliability. In the first months of the Pacific War, American submarines fired 97 torpedoes at enemy shipping. Only 3 ships were sunk, just 3 from 97 shots, against an enemy that had no idea submarines were coming. Commanders across the Pacific sent reports back to Pearl Harbor describing what they were seeing. Torpedoes running under ships without exploding. Torpedoes hitting hulls with a metallic clang and bouncing off without detonating. Torpedoes exploding prematurely, hundreds of yards before reaching their targets, alerting enemy ships and giving them time to run. In one engagement, a submarine fired 15 torpedoes at a Japanese ship that was not moving and could not fight back. 11 hit the hull directly. Not one of the 11 exploded. Submarine commanders who filed these reports expected the Navy to investigate the weapon. Instead, the Bureau of Ordnance, the department that designed and built the Mark 14 torpedo, reviewed the reports, and reached a conclusion. They decided the fault was with the submarine commanders. They said the commanders were firing incorrectly. Their approach angles were wrong. Their depth settings were miscalculated. The torpedoes were fine, they insisted. The men were the problem. Back then, the Bureau of Ordnance was so powerful within the Navy that even the Chief of Naval Operations had limited authority to override its decisions. Commanders who continued to push back found their competence questioned and their careers quietly noted. The Bureau's position was reinforced at every level. For the entire first year of the war, that answer held. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood did not accept it. Taking command of submarine forces in the Southwest Pacific in early 1942, Lockwood studied the reports flooding in from across the fleet and understood that the pattern of failure was impossible to explain by human error. Too many experienced commanders, too many different submarines, too many identical failures. Without waiting for authorization from Washington, he ordered his own tests. His engineers suspended a large fishing net vertically in the water and fired torpedoes at it set to different depths. A torpedo set to run at 10 feet cut the net at 21 feet. Another set at 10 feet cut the net at 22 feet. Every torpedo was running 11 feet deeper than its setting, exactly as the commanders in the field had been reporting for months. Lockwood sent the results to Washington. The Bureau of Ordnance disputed his methodology and questioned the validity of his tests. It took direct intervention from Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the entire Pacific Fleet, to force the Bureau to conduct its own tests. In August 1942, after 8 months of war, the Bureau formally acknowledged that the Mark 14 ran 11 feet deeper than set. 8 months of blaming the men, 8 months of dismissing their reports, and this was only the first of 3 defects. With the depth problem partially addressed, commanders began deactivating the magnetic exploder and relying solely on the contact pistol to detonate on impact. Results improved, but the failures continued. Torpedoes were still hitting ships and producing nothing but a dull metallic clang against the hull. On July 24, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Daspit of the submarine Tenosa found a large Japanese tanker nearly stationary, presenting a perfect broadside target at close range. He set up a textbook approach and began firing. He fired 15 torpedoes in total. 11 hit the hull directly, 2 exploded. 9 made the familiar clang of metal on metal and failed. Daspit had 1 torpedo remaining. Instead of firing it, he brought it home intact to Pearl Harbor. That decision changed the course of the scandal. Testing of the recovered torpedo at Pearl Harbor revealed the answer that had been hidden for 21 months. When a torpedo struck a ship's hull at a perfect 90-degree angle, the textbook kill shot every submarine commander was taught in training. The firing pin decelerated so violently on impact that it bent and crushed against itself without triggering the detonator. The better the shot, the more likely the torpedo was to fail. A direct perpendicular hit, the ideal attack, almost guaranteed a dud. An oblique, angled hit at 45 degrees gave the firing pin just enough time to function correctly, which is why an occasional torpedo exploded while the majority did not. Machinists at Pearl Harbor fabricated replacement firing pins from scrapped aircraft propeller shafts. The new pins were lighter and stronger, built to survive the deceleration of a direct hit without bending. In September 1943, the first torpedoes carrying the new contact pistols were sent back to war. 21 months after Pearl Harbor, all 3 defects of the Mark 14 had finally been found and corrected. Every single fix had been discovered by the men in the field, Every fix had been made over the resistance of the Bureau of Ordnance. As historian Clay Blair later wrote, each defect had been discovered and fixed in the field, always over the stubborn opposition of the Bureau of Ordnance. The results were immediate and overwhelming. American submarines that had been fighting with broken weapons for nearly 2 years now had torpedoes that functioned. In the final 2 years of the war, United States submarines sank over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping, strangling Japan's ability to supply its forces across the Pacific. The submarine force became one of the decisive factors in the defeat of Japan, but the full measure of what could have been achieved in 1942 and early 1943, with weapons that worked from the beginning, will never be known. Ships that should have been sunk were not. Patrols that should have succeeded failed. The Bureau of Ordnance was never formally held accountable for what it had done. The commanders who were blamed for failures that were not their fault had those failures noted in their records. Some of those records were never corrected. The men who went to sea in submarines with broken weapons and kept fighting anyway, kept filing reports, kept insisting that something was wrong when the most powerful institution in the Navy was telling them they were the problem. Those men never received the acknowledgement they deserved. The lesson was eventually written into doctrine. No major weapon system would be adopted without live fire testing under conditions matching actual combat. That standard exists because of what happened in the Pacific between 1941 and 1943. Because of the commanders who kept filing reports nobody wanted to read. Because of Daspit, who brought one torpedo home instead of firing it. Because of Lockwood, who ordered tests he had no authorization to order and sent the results to people who did not want to see them. The answer the institution had given was simple. The weapon was fine. The men were the problem. It took 21 months and the refusal of a few men to accept that answer to prove it wrong.